Hello, hello, and welcome to this wonderful, wonderful little early analysis video. So we have a new character out in-game, new pair of characters in one card, essentially. Nora and Pyrrha combine to form Pomegrenade, new legendary card. Pretty exciting. We'll get the card up here now. And over here.
Pyrrha! Done!
Basic idea of this card is that her stats and attack and everything like that relatively similar to Pyrrha as a card. Her ability, instead of Pyrrha's old shield ability, which we could go to here just for reference.
We all win when we work together.
Pyrrha throws her shield, does damage on the way out, does damage on the way back. Pierces through targets, really good AoE tool, good for sniping long-term value, or long-range value. So, Pomegrenade instead throws out Nora. So you'll notice that there is a pretty long channel time for this compared to Pyrrha's shield, compared to, like, Ice Flower or something. So there's some vulnerability here. The range for the ability is 13, which is long, but not global, so worth noting she cannot be played, like, all the way in the back line, and you can't use this ability to hit, like, an opponent's turret. There is some limitations to the range. Here's the art, which is great. Really, really fun new card. So, lots of people have been trying to experiment, trying to come up with new ways to run this card. We have, this was my my deck before Pomegranate. So the gimmick is you have Neo,
if you would.
You have Dropship, and you have Emerald, and you have Gunners. And all this value together is really, really, really strong, and like one concerted combo, where you have all of these things down, then you play Emerald. If your opponent plays an AoE counter,
Neo?
the clone Neo will jump usually to the AoE counter, be it Cinder or Penny. If you play Crow into that blob, you actually might get some decent value, but he's still going to take a lot of damage. It's a strong deck. And then you have Shadow Blake as just standard delay that really doesn't hurt being cloned at all. Nolan, really, really good defensive drop, obviously. Flint, with his very strong AoE ability, being able to push off counterattacks after your Neo push. And Ice Flower, of course, one of the strongest cards in the game, if not the strongest card in the game, with the ability to shut down almost any kind of aggression and be able to kind of walk up and probably use her ability again on offense after you use her on defense. Very, very strong. So, my kind of theory, my theoretical, hour one, whatever, day one deck with this card is with this Pomegranade.
Pyrrha! Done!
So, my idea is that you still want Ice Flower, you still want Neo, I think you still want Shadow Blake too. You definitely still want Flint and Emerald, because that's kind of this deck in a nutshell. Nolan is just too strong of like a value card to really take out of this deck, which leaves you with these two slots of testing Pomegranade and then whatever this slot is, right? So Dropship is really good here. But so are Gunners. And so to kind of analyze which one we want to use, we're going to have to start looking pretty deeply at the second ability for Pomegranade, because it's not just she's Pyrrha stats and she throws out a Nora. Because when this card is destroyed, it says upon incapacitation, it enrages nearby allies, boosting attack and damage by 40%. That's actually pretty significant. 40% is a pretty big number. And the rage effect area is a 5 range area. It's pretty nice. Pretty swell. So we'll go through some replays here. But before we do that, just looking at the card info here. Pomegrenade was concocted by Jean in a spur of the moment during the fight against the giant Deathstalker in the Emerald Forest. The maneuver caught the eye of professors and was pivotal in the creation of Juniper. However, it was named later down the line after John got jealous hearing about Ruby's team attack names. After Pyrrha's passing, her role is to be taken up by Jean, but the name forever remains. So yeah, we've had some replays against some pretty strong players so far. And so we're going to bring those up now. We're going to go through them. We're going to kind of try to analyze. So we were against Oja, we were against Clover, and then we were against Rainbuckets twice so far. And against Tagat as well. So these are all pretty strong players. We're going to try to go through each individual game, talk about the decisions being made, and talk about what Pomegranate is bringing to this deck, and try to analyze if she's right for this deck style, if she's right for the meta, and just talk over stuff in general. So, yeah. Let's go. So, both of us have some pretty solid openers here. We can both go Shadow Blake open. I have Ice Flower as well in my hand. They have Cinder. They're going to go, I think, with the White Fang Tower, if I remember this game correctly, which is fine. We went for Ice Flower. Ice Flower can shoot outside the range of this White Fang Tower, and then use her ability to clear it once it's up. They're going to play Shadow Blake in the back, just kind of conceding that they're going to lose this value. Playing Nolan up front, the last second there, probably a little bit too late. So we do have our Pyrrha out. And you'll notice a kind of cool thing here. Yeah, we're probably going to go back and start over this replay just so I can kind of go over this more. Because again, the whole idea is trying to analyze the Pomegranate stuff here. So maybe I need to play it at half speed just so I can talk about everything. Might be for the best. Then we'll go through it at normal speed maybe afterwards. But yeah, so, like I've been mentioning, obviously Ice Flower is still very, very strong in the meta. Ice Flower is probably one of the best cards in the game right now. Neo, after her bug fix, is maybe in top 5 cards in the game. As far as cards that are also really strong still individually, Shadow Blake, very good. Crow, very, very strong. This deck doesn't really have any room for Crow, unfortunately. So we'll play this at normal, or we'll speed this up until we play Pomegranate. So yeah, we played Neo in the back.
Done.
We're gonna play Pomegranate here, and then play Emerald to clone everything. Ice Flower from our opponent. They know our Ice Flower is on cooldown. So notice here, Ice Flower is kind of warm up. Ice Flower's like startup for ability is very, very quick. But what killed Ice Flower there? We do have our wonderful Neo, our wonderful clone team here. So you'll notice that again, Pomegranate has a lot of health here, tanking for a lot of damage. That was a really, really, really sick dodge, by the way, from Oja. It's kind of really, really difficult to do that. So managing to dodge the Ice Flower ability and save a lot of turret health as a result, that was really, really cool. Just a pretty sick dodge there with that Shadow Blake. So, yeah. Pomegranate on death, boosting attack speed, boosting damage. Does feel pretty real for this deck. It feels like she does help out Neo a lot. Feels like she helps out Ice Flower a ton. We are going to see both Ice Flowers be used here. Just going into half speed here, playing a Neo, and then a Nolan here, using the Nolan to stop their Ren. Neon being played here, with the Cinder kind of just doing constant damage here. Will almost certainly take out this poor Neo, who is just eating tons of damage from the Cinder. So, Neo, of course, her ability down there. Her damage and attack is buffed, but doesn't really matter too much because she's going to get cleared there. Flint, as always, a great counter to what Neo wants to do. Pomegrenade moving forward here. Nolan, fantastic defensive drop. So it does look like Pomegrenade will die right here. So Dropship is buffed and Emerald is buffed, but it's really important to notice here. Dropship buffed, the White Fang Thugs drop. The Thugs are not buffed right now. So that's kind of an interesting little observation here. Pomegranate again on death, buffs friendly units in 5 range with increased attack speed. Sorry, increased attack speed and increased damage. And so it's worth noting that if you're buffing the dropship and not the thugs, it might be better to be playing gunners with this deck instead of the dropship. You're obviously covered by AoE anyways, as we saw, because you have the... I'm going to pause this right here. But you're covered from AoE because you have the... you have your Neo clones. So when you clone Neo... you know, your opponent fires, let's say, a Cinder Barrage at your blob. It hits that blob, the clone Neo jumps right across the map and hits that Cinder. It's the same thing with Penny. It's the same thing with any of those kinds of interactions, right? And you could say, well, Ice Flower is a really, really strong card against this deck, and Ice Flower is probably one of the best ways to defend against the Air Neo strategy, right? And I don't deny that. I think that's actually correct. But here is another interaction that I really want to talk about here. You'll see me mistakenly use my Ice Flower ability here, which is a misplay, because I didn't know quite how this interaction was going to work. I didn't know if the ability was going to land in time. I'm not as familiar with the range. But the idea of this play here is you're playing Pomegrenade within range of the Ice Flower for the Pomegranade's ability, but outside of Ice Flower's ability, and then Ice Flower's range, basically, and then using Pomegranade to clear Ice Flower, or, at the very least, forcing Ice Flower's ability to go off, so your Ice Flower still has her ability up. So, we're going to see that play out now. So, it's at half speed, of course, just so we can see all the animations and everything. That is fantastic. So, yeah. I should not have used my Ice Flower ability there. Was just worried that the Pomegranade would not hit in time, but it did hit in time, and you notice it does have enough damage to clear that Ice Flower, at least on equal levels, so that's pretty cool. We're going to see that Cinder clear the Pomegranade, which means that all of these units are buffed right now. Emerald will get off one attack there, but not really benefiting that much from the buff. So, Pomegranade getting cleared there. We do have our Neo moving up. Again, we haven't really benefited too much from the attack speed thing here due to our opponent's very, very strong play. But, at the end of the day, we're still doing a lot of damage here. Neo, of course, getting frozen by the Ice Flower. We are going to see the Pomegranade drop, clear that Ren, but not quite clear the Ice Flower, which is a concern. We are going to have to use our ability to clear the opponent's Ice Flower as a result. We do misclick there, and their Ice Flower is still up. So lots of little misplays, of course. You're going to see a lot of misplays on these games from me and from my opponents, just people just not used to the meta. So yeah, just in general, you're going to see a lot of misplays, I think, today, as everyone's kind of getting used to this new card. But it's interesting to note, so you can snipe Ice Flower at long range with it, or at the very least, force out Ice Flower's ability. I think in most cases that's probably what'll happen, because Ice Flower is simply too valuable to just say, like, well, whatever, it just dies. So you have to use its ability. So for +1 aura, you can decide when you play Pomegranade to... within a short window, be able to trigger Ice Flower's ability to force her to avoid the kind of Nora projectile. So that's really interesting. I think that that's definitely worth noting. So we're moving on to the Clover game here. We'll do the Rainbucket games last, of course. So Clover, another really strong player. We're going to slow it down to half speed so we can talk more about things. We have our Shadow Blake more than likely being our opening play. Our opponent could start with Glinda, could start with Neon. Probably going to go with Glinda. He does go with Glinda. So the interesting thing, again, with Glinda in relation to Shadow Blake, in relation to Ice Flower, is these kinds of cards tend to outrange her turret. So it does look like she is not going to be trying to go for the Glinda value. It's just going to be trying to go for the AK Glinda offensive push, which is fair. Shadow Blake obviously is not going to be able to hold that off, especially with the Shadow still on cooldown. Just coming off cooldown there. I'm going to use the Ice Flower earlier here. We clear out the AKs. It saves us a lot of time. Their Ice Flower's ability triggers a little bit too early. She didn't want to get frozen by our Ice Flower. Or, sorry, it's not an Ice Flower at all. It's their Sniper Ruby. But regardless. Yeah, so we have squads being dropped off here. Not really doing too much here. Emerald's just kind of tanking everything here, which is great. Emerald doing a fantastic job there, tanking long enough to keep a lot of pretty high-value cards here going, namely, Shadow Blake and Ice Flower. Shadow Blake, of course, shadowing back. Neon played a little bit too early. We are going to see a very interesting Pomegrenade interaction. Look at how much damage he does there. This is a level 1 Pomegrenade versus a level 4 Cinder, which is on equal levels, right, for Epic to Legendary conversion. And Pomegrenade 100% clears out that Glinda. So very, very powerful here, obviously, and probably transition to just winning the game entirely, just because that's just so much value. You can see our poor opponent is just trying so hard to build up that aura in time, and it's just really not going to happen in time. So, important to note too, our opponent's tower focusing down, and turret focusing down this Pomegrenade, but Pomegrenade is still a level 4 Hera in terms of stats. So notice that this Pomegrenade won't even go down before that tower goes down. Very, very tanky stats. Definitely worth noting. You're not just playing her for the Nora ability, you're playing it because you're getting a Pyrrha, a shieldless Pyrrha, which is still pretty high value. So definitely a strong card, not just for the ability, but also for the stats. But as we noticed too, Ice Flower is a lot faster than her, so if you're playing it within Ice Flower range, you're playing it within the range of other units that can react and stun her, and she's going to have a lot of trouble using that ability. And at that point, you might as well just be playing a regular Pyrrha. Although, when this Pomegrenade dies, she also does that buff, and like we saw, sometimes that buff has a lot of value, sometimes it doesn't. So we're gonna move on to our Tagat game right here. Yeah, this is where Pomegrenade games start. Yeah, okay. So we're gonna watch this one, and then we'll move on to the Rainbuckets game. Rain is a very, very skilled player, obviously, and so I know that a lot of people are probably interested in that. So, we're against Tagat here. Our opponent considering opening Beowulf, which is pretty ballsy. It's Beowulf and Weiss here, so we're going to be playing our Nolan to stop a lot of that damage. Gonna freeze that Beowulf in time there, then use the Ice Flower as a follow-up, use the Blake as a little bit of DPS here, and of course we'll prevent a lot of that damage, which is nice. We now have Nolan walking forward to tank for the Shadow Blake, we have Ice Flower walking forward, and I'm considering playing Pomegrenade here just to get more testing done, see if her you know, dying is going to be worth it for the AoE like buff, you know. Instead, deciding to go for a Neo and a dropship and hope to get an Emerald up in time. It looks like our opponent does play Swarm, so that Swarm is going to chip away pretty quickly at our Shadow Blake and our Ice Flower.
Oh, man.
Ice Flower, of course, already using her ability, so she's already been pretty value, so it's okay to just lose her there. Neo, thankfully, keeping her shield up here. The Cinder ability will, of course, trigger Neo's ability there. Neo now sitting in the back line, very, very far beyond the range of that Neptune, so she will take down this turret. So a lot of really, really high damage bursts right there. Just going to show that even without Pomegrenade, this deck is still very, very strong. I don't think that a Pomegrenade played from either of us would have really been more optimal than what we did there. So yeah, this deck definitely still quite strong. So our opponent, of course, going for the Beowulf play yet again. We have our Nolan up, we have our Ice Flower up. Notice that their Weiss uses her ability before our Ice Flower uses her ability, but Ice Flower's wind up on her abilities about half a second as opposed to Weiss's 1.5 seconds. So, of course, you can Ice Flower a Weiss on reaction pretty reliably. It's really, really hard for Weiss to kind of it's really hard for Weiss to fight Ice Flower in any real capacity in a direct fight, because usually that's the way that an interaction plays out. We are seeing, once again, another use of Baby Deathstalkers, this time just flaring our Ice Flower. Since we didn't have Blake down, the Baby Deathstalkers have actually not gotten as much value as they got last time. We're going to use our Blake to hold off that BDS Swarm. Flint seems like the pretty obvious choice here on the right lane. Flint is going to stop this dropship coming down. We now see, of course, the Cinder being dropped for a little bit of chip damage. We are dropping a Pyrrha in the back, Pomegrenade, sorry, in the back. Pomegrenade being fired off to see how, again, this feels against Cinder. So obviously we're not doing the turret damage, which is, I know, what a lot of people have been doing with Pomegrenade, is doing that very, very, very high turret damage. But just worth noting, you can use it in these situations to kind of spot removal something before it does too much damage. Cinder is pretty strong against Shadow Blake as a response. So we got our little swarm going here. Cloned Pomegrenade. Worth noting, when the cloned Pomegrenade clears, you'll notice everything gets buffed. So if you use Emerald with Pomegrenade, you actually can get the potential for 2 buffs. But as we mentioned, the Thug's not buffed here. It could also be a duration thing. I'm not really sure. Again, it's going to need more testing. Weiss is actually pretty powerful here because we didn't have our Ice Flower up to counter. You can see the Ice Flower being played just now to counter this Weiss. So this Weiss is going to buy them a little bit of time, but since Pomegrenade is tanking, it doesn't matter as much because it's just so much damage is still being thrown out there. Ice Flower, of course, going to be used to destroy their Pyrrha. Our Pomegranade's still up. Pomegrenade now dying, giving everyone a little bit of a buff. Using the Pomegrenade ability, not on that Cinder, but on the tower, just to do a little bit more damage. Cinder, of course, is going to be taking a ton of damage from this Neo. Neo has very, very high attack damage. Neo is more than likely going to be cleared out pretty easily from this Baby Deathstalker swarm, using Emerald to try to clear out a little bit of that swarm along with the Shadow Blake, and it does look like Neo does end up living. Pomegrenade, meanwhile, on the right-hand side, still alive, still walking forward. Looks like Weiss is going to be played to stop her from doing as much as she would like to do. Misclick, it looks like, from the Weiss there, so Pomegrenade does end up dying, and now we see these thugs buffed, and you can see just how huge that is, how quickly that tower goes down on that Pomegrenade on death buff. So yeah, those were those 3 games, and it's definitely a combination of I've been playing this game for a while, I have a level advantage over some of these players, and we're using a pretty like kind of sculpted, like, this deck feels strong. This deck feels like really, 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 really powerful. And I guess what I mean by strong is I mean like this deck would be challenging to beat, I think, with almost any deck that you're playing. So Rain has had a different theory so far for where to use Pomegrenade. Again, keep in mind, just disclaimer for all of these games. Disclaimer 1, I think that Rain is a much better player than me. Rain has probably 4 or 5 times as many wins in RWBY Amity Arena as I do. Rain plays this game way more than I do. And he has definitely more tournament wins and more tournament placings in general than I, considering that I haven't had the time to play any RWBY Amity Arena tournaments yet. So super disclaimer, don't think that because I beat Rain in 2 random ladder games on the start of a new patch where we're all still getting used to it, this absolutely does not mean that I am better than Rain. But that having been said, it is interesting to see someone like me, who I feel is not as good as Rain, playing this deck and playing these cards and still getting victories. So that I think is interesting. So as far as levels go, the level advantage situation here between me and Rain is not as prevalent as it is with some other players. We both have level 1 Pomegrenade. We both have level 2 Ice Flower, which is pretty significant. We both have level 5 Shadow Blake, again, pretty nice. He has level 5 Penny to my level 5 Neo, so those are equal levels. I have a 9 Nolan to his 8 Nolan, so worth noting. And my rares, as you can see in this matchup, are all level 9s, as opposed to his rares, which again, 8 and 7, and the Baby Deathstalker and Baby Deathstalker Den, or Deathstalker Den, is 11 and 9 respectively. A lot of players tend to have lower levels with those. I want to check on mine actually just for comparison. So I have level 10 Baby Deathstalkers and level 10 level 10 Deathstalker Swarm. So that's 10 and 10 just as a comparison, not for this match, but just so you can see like the relative average levels at this kind of level. So he has 11 and 9 to my 10-10. Not that it's relevant again in this matchup. So there is a bit of level advantage with the rares. Not so much to determine a match, but again, just worth noting going into this if you're trying to get accurate data. All of these things do matter. So we're going to go in and we're going to look at these games where both of us are trying to use Pomegrenade in different ways. He's going for more of a Deathstalker Den and Penny kind of value situation in Neo, where he can chip with Pomegrenade and then hold out kind of forever with Deathstalker Den and the very strong cycle of Nolan and Baby Deathstalkers. He has Ice Flower and Penny for AoE responses. He has Shadow Blake for delay. He's got Neo to turn away swarms. Or sorry, Neon. I have Neo, but he has Neon to turn away swarms, as opposed to my deck, which is again more of an aggro deck, designed where you set up this combo and then just go right in ASAP. You want to absolutely destroy their turrets and towers as fast as possible, and then on defense, you're relying on Flint and Ice Flower and Shadow Blake to kind of hold the line until you can get another Neo cycle going. So we're going to get right into these games and see how they play out. Alright, we'll definitely playing this at half speed. I wish I could play it at like quarter speed or something, because there's going to be so many decisions, I'm sure, being made here. Both of us having Shadow Blake as an option for the opener, pretty strong. Of course, Rain also having a structure opening, deciding to go for that, which I think is also quite good.
I strike from the shadows.
That means that obviously this kind of meta has passed, but back in the day you could use this to stop an early Neon. So we are seeing the Pomegrenade after their Baby Deathstalker play, and we're going to see how much damage that does, and you see right there, definitely pretty significant damage, definitely bringing our turret all the way down to 3-3-9-1. So of course our opponent has played Pomegrenade for 6 aura, which means they don't have as much aura to defend. So Rain now going for the Ice Flower. Ice Flower, one of the best defensive cards in the game. And then using that, obviously, Ice Flower is now buffed as well from the Pomegrenade death, and now we are seeing the Neon being played. Very, very smart playmaking here. Our Ice Flower is still alive, but not quite finishing off their Ice Flower, which is definitely unfortunate for us. That Neon getting huge value, just kind of pushing everything away there, and buying that Ice Flower a lot of time, and definitely putting me in the panic room. I was worried, like, oh man, if he just has just enough delay, that Ice Flower might survive for a second activation of her ability. Does not. There is hit right there. We have our cloned Ice Flowers up. Moving forward, cloned Shadow Blake's up. This is a pretty strong push that we have here. And our opponent doesn't really have anything to stop this damage. Both of us are probably going to stop committing at this point and just say, okay, this is how this plays out. These characters are going to do a ton of damage. And, yeah, I do think that a lot of that had to do with the Pomegrenade opening, definitely risky in terms of spending 6 aura just for chip. And then, obviously, he did have a really interesting rotation setup with the Pomegrenade, but we're gonna keep going here. We'll talk about that more in a second, but we are going for the kind of double down push, which is risky against an opponent's Ice Flower. And you see Ice Flower, of course, freezing Pomegrenade before her ability can go off. We obviously should have played Pomegrenade way further back in a location where she could have done a lot more good. However, Pomegrenade is still alive here. Our Neo still alive, so worth noting we could still do a lot of damage here. Pomegrenade not destroyed yet, so the Neo does not get that buff. Pomegrenade is going to die not near any allies and will not buff anything. So definitely well played from Rain there, just kind of minimizing damage as best as he can without overcommitting. Still has enough aura to make things happen. You'll notice that we are essentially even in aura right now. So yeah, just well played from Rain there, trying to minimize as much damage as possible. Even so, obviously, the Neo, fortunately for me, and unfortunately for Rain, jumping across and doing all of that damage and bringing that turret down to 2,500 is not insignificant. Classic and strong play of Shadow Blake right there from Rain. Using Shadow Blake defensively against your opponent, Shadow Blake usually results in your turret taking 0 damage, and if played correctly like Rain just did, your Shadow Blake also taking 0 damage. So our opponent is now doing that strategy I mentioned, Pomegrenade to force out Ice Flower's ability. So now Ice Flower is going to need to use her ability here. Now, I don't play it correctly, and I don't use her iframes properly since I'm not used to the delay with Pomegranade's ability. And then another misplay here, where I play Pomegrenade way too close to my opponent's Ice Flower. Ice Flower then freezes the Pomegrenade. So now she's essentially just a tank there doing no DPS, and I'm just kind of desperately playing the Neo Emerald clone strategy here. And look at that, the clone Neo going out, but not quite clearing that Ice Flower. So now we have the Ice Flower slowly but surely building up value. So that's pretty scary too. We have our Pomegranate ability going off, doing about 500 damage again. Pomegranade buffing our Pomegranate in the back, but since she's not in attack range for anything, not really doing anything. So yeah, just worth noting, just all these little interactions that are happening here. So we are going to have another Ice Flower go off here. Ice Flower doing turret damage and clearing their defensive Nolan drop. We now drop our own Nolan in the back. Ice Flower, of course, we're just kind of leaving without support right now, since she's probably a lost cause that far up, but she did her damage. She did her tower damage. Our opponent, of course, throwing out another Pomegranade with that Nora, and doing another 500 damage, where you're seeing Ice Flower coming down from our opponent. Now, worth noting here, this is really, really huge. That Pomegranade got cleared. That Pomegranade got cleared for us. We played Pomegranade, then we played Emerald. Yes, we played other cards in there, but the most important interaction here is Pomegranade, then Emerald. So that means that our Pomegranade is cloned. We have a clone Pomegranade up. Our opponent plays Ice Flower, which instantly clears that clone. Clone is cleared. You'll notice that among other cards that are buffed in this situation, our turret is actually buffed with attack and attack speed right now. With damage and attack speed. So that turret is actually doing a lot of damage to their Pomegranade, a lot more than it would have normally. You can see doing a lot less damage now, a lot slower. So yeah, definitely cool that that's a thing that can happen. And now the next buff coming up here, Shadow Blake and Neon and Emerald all buffed here. Penny, of course, trying to clear this as much as possible. Nia jumping to the Ice Flower instead of the Penny, which is kind of interesting, just that's the exact damage that cleared her. A last-minute Ice Flower here, just to clear. And again, a bit of a misplay there. So I would say that if the game would have lasted, hypothetically, for like another 6 minutes, I think that Rain overall probably would have won that game. I think our misplays were starting to really stack up, and I think that given enough time in that match, Rain probably could have taken a turret, pushed it into sudden death, and then eventually pushed over either another turret or our tower. But early on, Rain going for that pomegranate chip, I think that was kind of what ended up sealing a lot of the deal, because that kind of put him into a bit of a flowchart where you had to use Ice Flower as the next defensive card. Ice Flower uses her ability. We use our Ice Flower is up. We freeze their Ice Flower with our Ice Flower. They play Neon to delay, but there's not that much DPS up. They play Shadow Blake, I believe, and then Baby Deathstalkers after that, and neither of them really stops the clone Ice Flower Shadow Blake push that we had going, and did a lot of turret damage as a result. So I think that, I mean, in the same way of playing almost any high aura card as a chip damage option, it is a little bit risky to just kind of open, or even like as your second or third card, play that pomegranate and just throw that ability out without at least removing something, because you're essentially sacrificing tempo for turret damage, and tempo is still pretty big in this game, even with all the new ways that you can defend with Ice Flower, with Neon, tempo is still pretty big. So we had another game with Rain after that, yeah, just worth noting that I think that overall Rain's deck might actually be more optimal than my deck, in the sense that I think that if you wouldn't have gone for that specific opener, and I wouldn't have gone for my specific opener, the opener might have played out really differently. Rain might have gotten a turret, and I might not have never have taken out his turret. I don't know, we'll see. But another game, another replay. Rain rematched after this. Rain, of course, likes rematching for data. He definitely grinds this game harder than almost anyone else in the game, him and CRVT in particular. So yeah, gonna play it at half speed again, just so we can analyze as fast as we can here. Rain, of course, going for the Deathstalker Den start. I would argue the strongest start for us was Shadow Blake with that hand. So, Rain once again seems to be hardcore testing this pomegranate opener. So, landing here, not quite getting the Shadow Blake, but if it would have cleared that Shadow Blake, that opener could have been extremely powerful, because it would have been a pomegranate that cleared the Shadow Blake and did turret damage, and that would have been truly incredible. That would have been like a really, really powerful opener. So I think that Rain 100% has the right idea here with these openers. Of course, us seeing their penny, doing chip damage, cloning the Emerald, setting up the Emerald Neo as fast as possible, and of course our clone Neo jumps across the map to clear their penny. So we're now in a pretty good situation, primarily again because of that pomegranate play. So that's what I mean about this analysis here, is that it's hard to kind of analyze. You have to look at this and say, like, well, how would that have played out if our Shadow Blake wasn't actually up? If the Shadow Blake and the turret would have gotten hit by damage, that could have put Rain very, very far ahead here. As a result of this situation, though, I believe that we end up pushing this over really, really quickly, just because Rain really doesn't have the aura at this point to defend this. We drop a dropship here in the back line, because I know that he doesn't really have the aura for an Ice Flower by the time that the dropship will be forward relevant. We are going to see a pomegranate shoot into the back line here to clear that Shadow Blake ASAP before she gets another ability usage. The of course, dropship is now dropped. All of those White Fang thugs. The turret is now done. And the Neon, as a delay measure, of course, doesn't clear any of these things since there's no DPS left to follow up the Neo drop. So that is pretty much the game. But I think that, like I said, it's difficult to analyze these games from some of these replays, and it's really going to be one of those things where we're all going to have to test these cards really, really hardcore to look at openers and say, like, if I open Shadow Blake 3 aura, right, and then I start moving forward, and I don't save my... I guess you really have to save your Shadow Blake Shadow now, because you can't just shade back. If you shade back as with Shadow Blake now, and your opponent plays Pomegranade, with the proper timing and the proper spacing, Pomegranade can hit your opponent, hit the turret, hit the Shadow Blake. Shadow Blake's not clear, so that's 3 hours just gone. Your opponent, you know, you're at you could call it you're at 7 aura and your opponent's at 4 if you want to call it that. And your opponent's essentially 3 aura ahead, arguably now, and they have a Pomegrenade, which is going to hit the turret first, which is exactly what you want. You want Pomegrenade to be at the turret first. You want Pomegrenade to be tanking, so that way other things can follow up behind her, do a lot of damage, and then when your tank dies and all the DPS is behind your Pomegrenade, you have all of this DPS already, and it's doing so much damage behind the tank, and then the tank, is destroyed, and it does an attack speed buff to all of your DPS units in the backline. Like, that's a really, really strong combo. So I think that Rain 100% has the right idea with this deck, and he has the right idea, I think, with the openings, too. And it just is going to boil down to us getting the execution perfect, I think, for this. Because now, with Pomegrenade in the game, I don't know if it's viable, really, for you to be shading back with Shadow Blake with the extremely high risk that your Shadow Blake gets cleared and you take enormous turret damage. And you're set up for a really strong early game push. Your opponent is. So you kind of have to save your Shadow and then shade away from the Pomegrenade ability when it goes off. And you're still going to take turret damage. But then if your opponent goes for that play, you have a Shadow Blake up against your opponent's shieldless, Nora-less Pyrrha, which I think is fine. You have great DPS between the turret and the Shadow Blake, and you can follow up with something as simple as like a Nolan, and that'll probably prevent, a lot of what she wants to do. And Shadow Blake's ability will probably be on cooldown by the time that Nolan goes off. So I guess, assuming that optimal interaction, your opponent not playing any DPS behind the Pomegrenade, and you playing the Shadow Blake and the Nolan, you are aura ahead. Again, assuming Shadow Blake takes no damage, assuming basically that the only thing that Pomegrenade attacks is the Nolan. But you gotta factor in the fact that Pomegrenade still did 500 damage to your turret, and now you're pushing forward with a Shadow Blake that is alone. So obviously that's not the way it's probably going to play out. Your opponent's going to play things behind the Pomegrenade, you're going to play things behind the Shadow Blake. But it's just worth noting, that 500 damage open, like that's a solid chunk of damage on your turret. It is the exact number, just for reference, in case anyone is curious. The ability is 495. A lot of top players are just calling it 500 damage because it's, just an easier way of phrasing it than 495. With a cooldown of 38 seconds, you could argue on one hand she's probably not going to get that second ability off too many times. On the other hand, though, she does have average move speed. So not fast, not very fast, but average move speed. She's probably going to be played with that first ability further in the back line, generally speaking, so you can get value out of that ability and not get interrupted. You want a front line with this unit, so there's like a lot of planning really with this card. You want to have her, so she's at the front. You want to have Pomegrenade, so she's at the front, but you want Pomegrenade to also get value from the ability, so she needs to be far enough back where an Ice Flower won't interrupt her, or a Torch Wick, or anything like that. So, yeah, I think positioning is going to be relevant with this card, which is cool. I like the fact that it's a non-global ability that also has a fairly long startup to her ability. It means that there's a lot of little ways to counter it. But just in general, I think this is an interesting card, and it's going to be hard to say if this card is truly, like, overpowered or underpowered or whatever yet. Obviously, it's so early in this patch. But I definitely want to just throw this video out there to just throw out some data. I think overall, Rain is probably on the right track. You have Baby Deathstalker Den. We could go over that deck again that Rain had used. Let me go to in the wrong menu. So Rain has a lot of AoE options between Ice Flower, Pomegranade, and Penny, and also has Neon, who is not AoE, but Neon does have strength against the swarmy plays that AoE is traditionally good against. Neon similarly can kind of turn away an entire swarm and buy you time for your pennies and your ice flowers and stuff. So that's cool. The Deathstalker Den, definitely a strong card. The cheapest structure in the game, and the de facto, fastest way and cheapest way to put a structure on the map to be able to counter things that do not like interacting with structures, like Beowulf packs and Beowulfs, dropships, that kind of stuff. Forcing your opponent kind of into the center and into double turret range. There's a lot of value to that card. Ursa you don't see too much right now in the current meta, but definitely a card where it doesn't like Deathstalker Den either, because it forces it into the center. Nolan and Baby Deathstalkers is just a really solid swarm. A really solid cycle, I should say. A really, really strong cycle combination there. Those two one-cost cards in the game, allowing you to get back to your Pomegranade, to your Ice Flower, to your Shadow Blakes, to your Pennies, to get to your other high-value cards. I, on the other hand, again, have gone for more of an aggro approach. I've been using the Neo deck pretty much all last patch, as I feel as though Neo is incredibly strong right now. I think the strongest part of Neo isn't even just her strength, but it's the fact that whether you're a lower level player, or a starter player, or a mid-level player, whatever you want to call it, or you're someone who is as good as Rain, who is arguably, if Rain is not the best player in the game, Rain is definitely in top 5 players in the game. And the Neo deck is so strong that even players like Rain, I think, have difficulty perfectly defending against it every single time. There's always that chance that a Neo is going to slip through and do a ton of turret damage just because of a slight miscalculation or slight misplay. And so the Air Neo deck kind of preys on your opponent's misplays and just sneaks damage in constantly over and over and over again. It's almost like a chip deck in disguise, but the chip is sometimes snowballs into Neo just taking down a turret entirely. But you just keep playing your Neo waves, and eventually your opponent's probably going to misplay, and your defense is still so strong with Ice Flower alone, but also with Flint and Shadow Blake. You can do a lot of defense. Nolan, you usually can hold out plenty of time and prevent plenty of damage. For another Neo dropship cycle, again worth noting, Gunners may be better with this deck because if dropship is buffed by Pomegranade, I don't believe that the White Fang Thugs that are dropped off are buffed, and even if they are, the amount of time that dropship still needs to fly to the opponent's turret, drop off stuff, do damage, all that, it's probably not. Pomegranade is probably not going to buff it. We only saw that one situation where Pomegranade died after the Thugs were out, and in that situation, they did a lot of damage. They took down that tower almost instantly. But the potential trade-off of you have Gunners in the back, and so you have you just imagine this, like Pomegranade back line having that ability ready, and then Neo, Gunners, White Fang Gunners, and Emerald, right? And you have Gunners in the backline cloned, doing DPS. If your opponent plays AoE, Neo clears the AoE. The Neo clone clears the AoE, and you still have the regular Neo up, and the Pomegranade up. And Pomegranade probably hasn't used her ability yet. Just worth noting. If they don't play AoE, and Pomegranade goes forward and tanks, pretty scary. Pomegranade's movement speed is not necessarily optimal for this. She doesn't really move herself forward fast enough to make this work 100% of the time. But obviously the ideal is Pomegranade moves up and tanks. The Neos are still alive, and that's really annoying for them to have to try to deal with that. Ice Flower, of course, still the best counter to all of these things, but that's why you have your Pomegranade up, so they now need to time the Ice Flower against the Pomegranade, which is definitely frustrating for them to not be able to stack aura, perhaps, in the way that they want to. You could also argue that you just play the regular Neo Swarm, and if your opponent plays Ice Flower, your opponent plays a backline, you can follow up with the Pomegrenade, and that's entirely possible too. You could also just play this like a regular Ice Flower setup. You have all the cards to use for the regular Ice Flower setup, and you just have Pomegrenade as kind of this backup cycle. And at worst, Pomegrenade is 6 aura. You do 500 damage to a turret, and you have a tank walking towards their turret that they should answer with something, at the very least a Nolan, right? So it's an interesting card, and I think that it's gonna require a lot of testing to figure out exactly where it is, but I think that the combination of Pyrrha stats, the Nora 500 damage ability, and the attack speed buff, which is probably the hardest to analyze, I think that all three of those are really, really powerful for 6 aura. Again, regular Pyrrha with a very powerful shield toss ability, which is like, what, 309 on the way out, 309 on the way back, or something like that. So let's just call it like 600 damage or so. That's a 5-cost card. So for +1 aura, you're losing the shield toss, gaining the Nora toss, and then gaining the attack speed buff. Yeah. It's interesting. It's in an interesting spot, and again, I really do appreciate the fact that, one, they made the ability not global, but still gave it a lot of range, so it can snipe things like Ice Flower. It has like almost like the exact right amount of range where it can snipe Ice Flower, but not globally damaged turrets. Now, maybe we're going to test this card, and we're going to find out that 13 range is still too strong, that it's just guaranteed turret damage every single time. It's entirely possible, too. It might still be too strong of a card. But I'm just happy on a surface level that it wasn't another global. I think the global abilities are cool, but because it's not global, there's a lot more wiggle room that you have, I think, with this card. And then on top of that, the fact that the ability isn't like an instant cast, Nora just flies off. There's like a long prep time. There's a long cast time to this ability, and so it can be interrupted by so many things. Realistically speaking, that'll usually be Ice Flower, but Torchwick after that, and then after that, you still have other interrupts. You do have Neptunes, you do have Nolans. There are ways to interrupt this card. I think that Ice Flower is probably the most practical one, again, followed by Torchwick, and then followed by almost every other interrupt is probably around equal level for interrupting. But still, you can interrupt the ability, which is exciting. It's something that's almost impossible to do with cards like Ice Flower with their very quick startup ability and their solid range. So the fact that this card is a longer wind-up to her ability, again, I think is going to make this card a lot easier to balance. I think that they made the right decision with making it not global and giving it a long wind-up. Personally, I think that those were two strong design choices to allow this card to kind of breathe and not be too strong or too weak. But it definitely feels on the strong side so far. We're definitely going to do a lot more testing with it, and we'll see how it all plays out. But definitely excited for Pomegrenade. I realized throughout this whole video we haven't actually played her intro, and I suppose I should. So we're going to do that now. Pretty fantastic reference to the Season 1 Pyrrha Nora team attack on the Giant Deathstalker. So yeah, great stuff. See y'all next time. I'm going to upload this video and then pass out. I have to be in work in like a few hours. So I'm going to go process this video on YouTube and everything and upload it up. And I will see you all on Twitch probably on Friday. I believe that's the plan. So see you all very, very, very soon. This card definitely feels strong. I just don't wanna like go like, this card's broken. We'll see. We'll see. We'll see how strong this card is. It definitely feels like it's much more on the strong side than the weak side, though. Preliminary, like, assuming that Ice Flower is like a 10 out of 10 card, in terms of like strength level, and Crow is like a 9 out of 10 in terms of strength level. Like, he's like almost one, like, he is one of the strongest cards in the game, no question. But he's not like Ice Flower levels of like, probably should be nerfed. And I think that Neo is probably in that territory too, like a 10 out of 10 almost right now. Probably somewhere between a 9 out of 10. I would say that right now, this new legendary Pomegrenade feels like she's probably around a 9 as well. Like, she feels like she's Crow strength. I don't know if that puts her to the 10 level that Ice Flower is, and that Neo potentially is with the bug fix now. So I would say probably like a 9 out of 10 right now. But potentially 10 out of 10 if people figure out, like, the optimal openers for her, people figure out that, like, she's just the best, one of the best cards to be playing in the game. Maybe she is Ice Flower level. But, I just hesitate to say that yet, just because we just have so little data on her. It's just going to take a lot of practice and a lot of deck building and a lot of practice. Yeah. Anyways, see y'all next time.